48-hour art check, round 101. So I grew up on the 101, and I feel like I should sing like a song. There's like a bunch of them, but now I can't think of any of them. Like,
Well, the only thing I keep thinking of is like, Cruella de Vil, right? Because 101 Dalmatians.
oh yeah,
But
no, there's da 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 driving down the 101, California, here I come.
that's right.
Or I feel like America has a 101. Ventura Boulevard, nah, Ventura Freeway. I can't remember. Anyway, that's how much planning we put into the 48-hour art check. As I try to think of stuff on the fly after we've gone live.
I I actually, it's funny, but there's a part of me that's just really proud that you said the 101 because that proves you grew up in California.
Now, I have people that argue with me on this, and it's the 5, it's the 101. But
Yeah.
anything that goes east-west, it is not the. It's just 46, 33, 210. There's nothing. It's the is vertical, but there's no the to horizontal. And it's only in California that you say the, because I don't care about the rest of the states.
Yeah.
You can have the same numbers. It doesn't matter. The 101 is on the
California
West
really, yeah, we're the only people with real freeways. Come on.
Coast. Right. Well, and it's kind of like that. It's kind of like that all over. Like I just listened to this comedian. She was like, when you ask somebody from San Francisco where they're from, they say the Bay Area. You know how many bays there are in the United States? That's a little conceited to think that I know which bay you're talking about. And you know what? And yet you do.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Oh man, I seem to be freezing up here. All right, maybe we're good now. Cool. So should we jump in? We got some people in the chat already. What's up, Squatchy Inc. Man? He's been all over the place.
Yeah, super awesome tattoo artist, actually. Finally checked out his stuff on Instagram recently.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, it's legit. All right, so let's say, let me see what's going on here. I want to see if I can shut some stuff down because I am getting some major, is the lag better? Am I like freezing up people in the chat? I'm like jumping around for some reason.
Yeah, I'm seeing you like kind of blip around. I mean, like your audio's fine though.
Yeah, well, if my audio's fine, I'll just look like Max Headroom but sound normal.
That's pretty awesome. You can just be like, hello. So Scott in the chat said when he moved to Washington State, they said it was a no-no to call it the 5. Only weird California people say that. No, only weird Washington people say the 5 without a the. That's just weird.
Yeah.
I can't even say it without a the. It's just weird.
What do you call it when you don't call it the 5? Is it Highway 5? Interstate 5?
I think they just call it 5.
5?
That's weird to me.
It's
very
the 5.
strange. Yeah, it's the 5. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's get into what we got done.
Okay, I trapped myself in chords. All right, why don't you get started? So what did you get done in the last 48 hours?
Okay, so I managed to finish the page for the dragon story for the Hundreds anthology #2, Werewolves and Unicorns. And then I finished the rough pencils for my page for the next page of Quarterly Stories. And I've finished tight pencils for 3 panels. And I will be finished with at least 4 panels, probably 5 panels of tight pencils tonight. I snuck in a little drawing of a comic I did with my son Benji, which he dictated to me and I drew. And there was a little moment in it that I thought was really brilliant storytelling. where he's getting in this argument with his pet dinosaur because his dinosaur wants a sandwich and he's refusing to get him a sandwich. And then he looks at a cell phone that has three messages, and the three messages are all from the dinosaur, like pretty much being like, "Hey, where's my sandwich?" And I thought that was actually, I might have to steal that bit for something if I write it, because I think that's hilarious. If somebody's in an argument and then like they get interrupted by their phone, and their phone has three messages arguing the other side. I just thought that was a good bit. And that was all from my son. Like he just was telling me what to draw, and I was like, "And then what?" And it's really fun to see what happens with a kid when you just say, "Okay, and then what happens?" You know.
Right.
It's kind of a neat lesson for me to like try to be a little more like that when I'm writing. And then I think that's pretty much it. I'm just and then I penciled the first panel for the next page of the dragon story, and so I need to pencil the second tonight as well. So yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I love drawing. I mean, like Axe Cop, Ethan Nicole and his younger brother like already kind of patented and cornered that market, but I've tried it a couple times. Just having your kids just tell you what to write or what to draw, and it is hilarious. At one point in time, Scarlett, who is maybe 4, dictated a story to me about, I can't remember exactly what happened, but there was this poop throwing machine in space, and I think I was listening to like this really long autobiography about Abraham Lincoln, so I was probably talking about him all the time, because then like Abraham Lincoln went into space with a bunch of like unicorns to like fight the poop throwing machine or something. I mean, you couldn't. Kids are just amazing. It's just incredible. I don't know. It was funny. It was pretty fun.
That sounds like an excellent plot, actually. Abraham Lincoln fights the poop machine.
Right.
Yeah, so, it's crazy what they come up with, right? So what'd you get done?
So I got this done. It's a little. It's okay. So technically, and actually, I completely failed on what I claimed I was going to get done, because I was going to completely finish penciling this page, and what happens is that I did that and it was really boring. So I tossed it, and then I was like, I went back to the drawing board on the composition of it, which I actually think I found an element of the story that worked a lot better, and also the composition is much more interesting. So before, I only had kind of these zigzagging lines back and forth. I didn't have anything else, and so I just want to zoom in on this a little bit. No. Not working. How about right? It's no longer worth zooming in on. There we go. So before I just had like these little zigzagging like sections of the wave kind of going back and forth with different little montage elements. But then I was like, I want to actually add in this main villain, because this is and I'm going to say her name wrong. Anyway, it's Poseidon's wife and Triton's mom. Aphrodite, I can't remember her name. I'm really tired. I'll talk about that during challenges. But anyway, doing this actually makes a lot of sense for the story, and it also makes the page more engaging, because I had already done kind of a montage page with like all the characters. And so I didn't want to do like half of the story of a 4-page story just to be like montage stuff. And so I rewrote this page to be that she was sending all of these monsters against them. And so it's still montage, but now it's like more centralized around like an actual antagonist, rather than just like, and then we went through a bunch of stuff and it was random. And so now I feel like it hones it a little bit better.
Awesome.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm way behind of what I wanted to be on, but I'm okay with it, because I think this ultimately the story is better off because of it now. So,
well, I can definitely say it's hard to speak too much to story yet, but like I can definitely say on the just visually, it is nice to have like a big splash page, just
Yeah.
like got kind of like a break from, because I think the other pages, I mean the one with the ship is a splash page as well with like kind of a vignette, but it's just it seems like a nice way to kind of break up the tempo a little bit, and I think
Yeah.
that I think that is a good call. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So that's what I got done. So not as much as I intended, but I'm actually pretty happy with the progress. So yeah.
Nice.
How about challenges? What got in your way?
Oh man. Like weirdly enough, like I had a fairly productive weekend, but it is just it's fighting the exhaustion after a trip. So the main thing was because I did that day trip that took like 2 days. Those kind of trips, you're like pretty much having to be firing on all cylinders constantly on,
Yeah.
for about like 16 to 17 hours.
Right.
And that's like 2 days in a row. So it's like doing that and then getting back and then having the kind of disorientation from traveling, just trying to kind of get back in the flow of things. As silly as it is, because it was a fun trip and stuff, but it's like there's definitely a moment of just yeah, of exhaustion, just kind of trying to fight that and create art, is pretty challenging, I think. But
Yeah.
yeah, that was pretty much my main struggle. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you?
Definitely. Similar, actually, very similar. Like all weekend, every time I tried to get anything done, I could get about 10 minutes into it, and then I get interrupted. And it was always like stuff that like I needed to take care of, and so I never really got, which I probably had like 90 minutes worth of work broken up into 10-minute chunks over the course of 2 days. And so it was just like, it was super frustrating. And then last night, at the end of the night, my 6-month-old had this huge like cyst on his back, and he sleeps on his back. And so he couldn't sleep, and we had to take him to urgent care. Luckily, there was a place open, and then it turns out he has an ear infection and a thing. And then my daughter has a sore throat, and so I told my wife to go to bed because I have an 8 o'clock class on Mondays, and so I said, "You go to bed." So she went to bed at like 7, and I like had him, and it was like he was like inconsolable unless I was holding him. So I was holding him until like 2, just to try to give Malia like enough time to basically be able to stay up all night. And so then I went to bed at like 2-ish, and then I got up. And the reason I'm so tired and kind of foggy right now is that I'm on the selection committee for work for several positions, and so we had interviews after work, and so like I did like a full day of work, and then I did 3 hours of like video interviews of potential candidates, and so I got home at like after 8, and I had to do some stuff. And anyway, I actually just barely got down to my studio 10 minutes before we went live. So yeah, just kind of like what you're saying, except less traveling. Just,
Yeah.
lack of sleep
Yeah. I
and
mean,
going all day.
well, and being on selection committees and any committees basically with teaching is just complicated and time consuming, so.
Right. Yeah.
And then having a sick baby is that's a whole different game. So
Yeah, it's
I'll be
hard.
in your shoes as well. All right, well, let's get into plans. So, other than sleep, my plans are to basically, I'm hoping to pencil, like I should be on panel 7 of quarterly stories, like that page,
Yeah.
which should put me in a good place. And then that should be tonight. And then by the next art check, I'd like to be on panel 8 or 9 for tight pencils on that. And then I'd like to have at least, I'll say like 2 more panels penciled on that page of the dragon story for the hundreds anthology. So yeah,
Cool.
yeah. What about
Um,
you?
I'm going to repeat my plans from the last time. I just want to finish this page, which I think is doable. I'm not going to put anything in that upper left-hand panel because I'm going to leave that for text. And then I basically have two other panels to kind of fill in, and there's going to be a lot of background because she's breaking through the middle of those. Um, but basically, I have two more ship versus monsters panels to draw, and then I'll be done with that page. Um, that's kind of it. And then I'm still kind of crunching away on getting that other tutorial channel ready. I've kind of stalled out on that, but if I've got time, I'd like to make some progress on kind of those animations. So we're going to do kind of like an intro animation and like a title graphic animation. And I've already like rigged up the tractor, but I just need to like, what I'm trying to do is figure out a way so that I don't have to render an animation each time I do anything.
Yeah,
And I think in my head I've figured it out, and so I've just got to test it out. Basically, I'll run a macro script that will switch the scene at a specific point in the animation, which will make it look like it's part of the animation, but it actually will just be an image behind the animation with an alpha transparency. I'm probably not making sense, but I think it'll work. So I've got to test that, and I might be able to do that in the next couple days. We'll see. So that'll be my bonus round if I can get to that. That would be kind of cool. So
nice.
yeah.
Cool. So let's get into the topic. Did we even decide on a topic? I'm trying to.
We did not decide on a topic, but while we're deciding on a topic, we've got some cool things going on in the chat. Basically, everybody's just relating their connection to California, which is always fun. I haven't lived in California since 1998, but I still like it a lot. I grew up there. And if you guys have a moment to share this, that's always cool. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you're on my channel. You can like and subscribe. Also, I forgot to mention this. This is news. There is now an official 48-hour art check Twitter account that I have rigged up with an IFTTT situation. If you know what IFT is, it's kind of like a triggering system. And so anytime we go live on either Josh's channel or my channel, a tweet will automatically be sent out when that happens, so that if YouTube doesn't notify you, because sometimes even if you ring the bell, you don't get a notification, Twitter can. So if you'd like a redundant notification system, you can follow that account on Twitter. There's all kinds of interesting triggers that you can do on Twitter. And then also we have people in the chats and others that are not in the chats right now that are doing some form of the art check. And we're going to use that Twitter account to kind of promote them as well. And so if you tag that account in the promotion of your art check videos, I will retweet it, which right now all 4 of my followers will know about it, but hopefully it grows and becomes a place like a hub where we can kind of promote everybody's art checks, because that's kind of one of the goals that we have, is to kind of like help out. I just watched Scott O'Green on I'd Rather Be Drawing over the weekend, and it was really interesting. He was actually answering our question where we were saying, why do we tell stories? And he was talking about why he told stories. It's a fascinating episode. And so if he's in the chat right now, and I think you can click on his name and go to his channel, so you can check out the video that he just posted just recently.
It's funny. I was listening to it like about a minute before we went live. So I'm going to listen to the rest of it after, but it's exciting to see other people taking it on, you know?
Yeah, for sure. So for a topic, I've got a couple of ideas. Do you have any ideas on anything?
I'm pretty blank for ideas right now.
Okay. I think there was a question the last time. There's been a topic that's been on my list for a while,
Uh-huh.
belonging versus fitting in. And
Ooh, I like that.
there was a question about it. I can't remember. I think it might have been Samurai Ox that asked it, or Marshall. I'm not sure. But in any case, I think that would be a fun topic. So we could do that one if you're cool with it.
Yeah, yeah. I think maybe finding your tribe. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that'd be cool. So let me do the podcast intro version of it. Today's topic is belonging versus fitting in, also known as finding your tribe. So I was reading this book by Carol Dweck that talks about like how we learn and things like that. And prior to that, I'd read several books like Into the Wilderness and others, and I'm blanking on the author's name now. I'll have to remember her name. It'll come to me. I'll put it in the show notes if it doesn't. But they were talking about the difference between being able to feel like you belong somewhere versus adapting yourself to fit in. And so the difference is if you feel like you're very comfortable in your home with your family, then you feel like you belong there, right? But if you feel like you need to change part of your personality or change or hide different aspects of who you are, or change what you do, to feel like you have a sense of belonging, you won't actually belong, but you're seeking to fit in. And so I think the main difference between this is whether you are being authentic to who you are and you've found people who accept that, or whether you are adapting and changing who you are, changing your identity to be able to conform. And one will give you a lot of fulfillment, and the other will give you kind of immediate social gratification, but will feel empty. And the reason I bring this up on this show, which seems a little odd, is I think that we can do this with our art. And there was a question on the last show, which is our centennial show, where we kind of opened it up to the chat to people to throw out topics. And somebody asked, I think it was Samurai Ox asked, what do you guys think about crowdsourcing ideas for artists? And the discussion that we had got me thinking about this topic, because we talked about how that can be a great idea to kind of connect with your community and do that. But if you do that too much or do it in the wrong way, you can lose yourself in kind of chasing trends or trying to please the crowd rather than making what you feel like you want to make. And so it's kind of this age-old argument. And I don't think it's about fan art, but I think fan art can fit in there if it's done in the right or the wrong way. And so I think it's kind of like one of those things where if you are making art that you feel you authentically want to make, if you're writing the book that you want to write, if you're drawing the thing that you want to draw, then the people that accept that and are excited about that, you belong with them. But if you see popularity trends and you're chasing trending hashtags, and you're seeing popular movies and you prepare a piece to come out, right as the movie hits to kind of capitalize on that, and you're not really a fan of that piece, but you just think that it's going to be popular, you're trying to fit in. And so I was just curious, kind of, based on that, what kind of things come to mind as you're hearing me ramble for several minutes?
Um, it's funny, but like, there's one of my favorite quotes is from Almost Famous, and I'm probably gonna botch the quote, but it's like the only true currency in this world is that which is exchanged with total nerds, something to that extent. Oh, that which is exchanged between two people who are uncool,
Yes.
and uh, like I can definitely say there's a place for people who are kind of like seeking to fit in and kind of adapting their styles for sales and adapting themselves for sales and stuff like that. And to an extent, you're going to have to do that kind of in the workforce or when you're doing freelance illustration. We kind of touched on this before, but it's like if somebody's giving you their money, usually you're contractually obligated to draw what they're asking you to draw. And so, that's an exchange, and that's definitely a situation where you're definitely trying to please that client. However, I think when it comes to art and in general, just like my personality in general has never really vibed well with the striving to fit in thing. Because I just I was never that good at it. Like I was never good at like faking who I was. And so even at a really young age, I remember having these moments where I would try to be like other people and try to kind of fit in, and then finally kind of exhaust myself, give up, sort of accept who I was. And it was usually in those moments where I kind of gave up, stopped trying, where I would kind of like find my tribe. And by tribe, it's like, just people who accepted me for who I was and how I was and for my interests. And for just, a lot of like nerdy stuff that I was into, like reading books and like fantasy and comic books and drawing and skateboarding and like doing these things that were kind of like outsider things. And the weird thing is, by embracing those kind of outsider things, I found that I gained acceptance from even the larger group that I was initially trying to impress in the first place. And it's like kind of like by giving up and just sort of creating and being authentic to myself, like I found my tribe, and in finding my tribe, the tables kind of turn. What's interesting is I think that parallels, the reason I'm bringing up my personal stories, I think that parallels with art. Like I think there are phases as an artist where you're trying to kind of please people. And I think that the point where you start actually building a lasting audience is like the point where you kind of give up on the trying to appease everyone and just trying to make the best thing you can in the realm that you want to make. I think that's where you find your voice. That's where you find your tribe, and where you find like less anxiety too, because I think there's a lot of anxiety to trying to kind of pretend you're someone or your art is something that it's not.
Yeah.
And I think there's a beauty to just kind of embracing what it is, and then finding your audience and finding your group and finding peers that have similar or differing interests, but like will kind of get your back, while you're making stuff. So,
yeah. And honestly, I think there's,
Sorry.
honestly, I think there's also a lot of anxiety in making the art that you feel like you should be making, but also not yet finding your tribe and belonging to a group. And so you feel like you're just shouting into the void and no one cares. So there's anxiety on both sides, because I don't think it's necessarily a given that one day you're going to wake up, this hasn't been my experience at least, and be like, you know what, screw it, I'm just going to make what I want to make and do it to the best of my ability and show it to people, and then no one cares. And you're kind of like, oh, okay, well, that can happen too. And that sometimes that can happen for a while. But the interesting thing is, and I've heard this over and over from other artists, Sean Crystal is a great example of this. He's started and runs the Ink Pulp Audio podcast, which if you guys haven't listened to that, it's phenomenal. But he said that he started very technical, and then every once in a while he would just like let loose and go crazy with some really like loose, sketchy dry brush, and everybody on social media would like freak out and love it. And he's like, dude, seriously, that was just a sketch. And then he really started getting some kind of notoriety when he like gave into that, and that started becoming his production work when he was working on comics. And he started doing, like, if you look at his early Deadpool stuff versus like his Mother Panic that he did a little later on, you can see some fairly significant difference. And there's just a lot more energy in it, but he actually had to kind of let go of what he thought he should be doing And it's not like he was trying to be inauthentic, but he was chasing the should rather than kind of embracing what was inside in the artist that he was. And it was kind of an interesting journey to kind of watch him go through that. And I'll say this, the entire time, phenomenal art. It's not like the stuff that he made early on was bad. It was great. It looked wonderful. But there's a more depth of feeling and emotion in the line work more recently when he kind of flipped that switch and started to kind of let go. And he talks about all of that on his podcast. It's a really interesting journey to kind of watch him do that.
Yeah, I think Scott in the chats kind of brings up something about why people overreact to kind of like harsh critique or whatever, is sometimes people are looking for a place to belong, but they feel defensive when someone makes them try to fit in. And he brought up kind of like the hundreds conversation that we had a couple, I think on the Artcasters, where it was about the enforcer on their kind of telling people they have to follow the challenge in order to be in the challenge. Right. And then he said that's not really the situation, but that's what comes to mind when he thinks about it. And I will say, like, there's a difference between kind of like, for instance, like if I want to be a part of like the National Cartoonist Society or whatever, that is me trying to join a group, and there's certain things I have to do in order to get inducted to the NCS or whatever, and it's like you have to go through this application process, and then once you're accepted, you have to go through like an initiation ceremony and all this cheesy stuff, and that's all because I actually liked that group. But so what I'm trying to kind of distinguish with, and I'd say it's the same for the hundreds, where it's like there's parameters to that group, but the question is, like, is that a group that fits you or not? Because if it's not a group that fits you, why would you want to be a part of it? I don't think there's anything wrong with joining groups. Mm-hmm. I just think that often we're trying to chase groups, or like Cory, like you were saying, like chase the should, and rather than chase what we actually want.
Yeah.
Or chase like what we actually know we should chase, like our own should, as opposed to like society's should. And that's a big challenge for artists, like that whole kind of navigating between shoulds.
Yeah,
because there's a lot of societal expectation that that artists just aren't going to really live up to. Like, we're not going to be driving Beamers the majority of the time. There's a small percentage of artists that are going to be living it up and living large and having large houses and stuff like that. But for the majority of us, it's a pretty like, it's a lower cost. It's a lower income than bracket than a lot of people. And so, like, in a weird way, by making the decision to become an artist, especially an artist who does comics, and then if you're in like the weird boat, like I am, where it's like you decide to do indie comics, you're gradually kind of lowering and working against kind of what a lot of society kind of teaches you to do. So it's a little bit of an act of like punk rock to make art, and then make comic art is just even more punk rock because it's just it's even more of a subcategory. And then to make indie comics is even more punk rock because it's like it's a category, that's below a category where like even the guys at like the big two publishers scrape by to make a living. And then you get down to indies and like Fantagraphics books where like bestsellers are pushing like 2,000 or 3,000 copies. Like that's not a hefty living,
right.
So my only point is, like, if you're wired to kind of go and chase the group, like, and by the group in this case I mean like society in general, like what most people are like, not, I shouldn't say most people, but a lot of people in society, like, they want to get rich, have a house, have a pool, have a big barbecue, like have a big space where they can have Super Bowl parties and stuff like that. and that may not be the result when you choose to dedicate yourself to your craft. Um, so like just the choice of dedicating yourself to your craft might mean sacrificing, some vacations, or like Cory and I, like often, I'm not complaining because this is like, once again, like I was saying, this is a choice, but it's like Cory and I are doing art at a time where a lot of people are like spending family time, or are winding down and watching movies, like,
Yeah.
and so there's a sacrifice and there's a difference between the lifestyle of somebody doing art, especially personal projects, um, versus somebody not engaging in that. And so, like, I guess what I'm getting at is like, to me, how this ties into this topic is like, if you're gonna choose to kind of engage, um, understand like our tribe is a weird tribe. Like the art tribe is a weird tribe.
Yeah.
It's full of people who, like the business tribe is full of some people with failed businesses. But
Right.
the successes are like wild when they succeed. Each tribe has kind of their own like thing, their own struggles, their own successes. But just know like the art tribe is a weird tribe, and then the comics tribe is an even weirder tribe. The indie comics tribe, it just gets weirder. And the cool thing is, only weird by the standard that's placed by the majority. And to me, I think the act of even choosing to be an artist is kind of deciding to not be in the majority. And
Yeah.
and I kind of like that about art. I've always liked that about art. I think that's what drew me to art. Was like, not everybody liked drawing in classes, but it just kind of started whittling out the older I got. Like it was just less and less people drawing. And I think it's because it's hard, and I think it's also because some people just fell in love with it. And I think a lot of those people tend to be sort of outsiders who think outside of that kind of thing, and make decisions based on um, more philosophically deep things than like this is what everyone wants.
Yeah. And I think I want to get to these comments in the chat because they're like super awesome, and have triggered several stories that I want to tell. But I think that you can be that in anything. There's a way to do that as a dentist, right? There's a way to do that as an accountant. There's a way to do that as a woodworker. And I think the way to do that is an interesting thing, because there's always a pull towards mediocrity and conformity in any industry and in any tribe and in any whatever. There's always a pull to fit in, to abandon your calling and to fit in and to toe the line. And I think at any point in time, you can work in any field and do it your way, with a balance, right? Because if I were to right now quit my job and say, screw the world, I'm going to do my own thing, based on the income I'm making off of my art, I would starve, and I would immediately have to get a job again, right? But I'm able to do what is authentically true to myself, because I'm also balancing that with, doing some responsible things. And I think there's a different situation for everyone. And so there's this interesting balance. But there's these comments in the chat that I really want to get to. Squatchy Inc., who's a tattoo artist, he said, after working in the tattoo industry for 18 years, I've never felt the openness and encouragement as I get from the comic world. I think I found my tribe. And then Scott replied and said, word, that's how I finally feel with comics. Still working at it, all of it, but it feels good, And then Squatchy Inc. says, I love tattooing. I feel like I put it, sorry, I tried to read up there. I love tattooing. I feel like I put it down. But as for my love of art and comics, I've gotten more inspiration. And this like super reminds me of kind of like several things that have happened to me that all feel the same. And I think this might be a good way to gauge whether you're on the right track or not. In my bachelor's degree, I changed my major 5 times. And each time I walked in and I put everything I had into that particular degree, and I just felt out of place. I felt like
Yeah.
there were things about that major, and I tried art and psychology and English and university studies sort of business track, and then I ended up in communication. And until I got into communication, I always felt like a fish half out of water. I kind of belonged. People were nice. But then the thought of like doing that thing for 40 hours a week just felt so soul crushingly horrible that I was like, this can't be it, you know? And then I just felt like maybe my personality was such that I would never be satisfied with anything, and maybe I was expecting too much. And I actually do think that that is a personality trait that drives me, is that I'm never satisfied. But at the same time, I switched my major to the comm department, and when I got there, I was like, hey, these are my people. They like talking about talking. They like talking about thinking, right? They like thinking about talking. Like this is, I love this, and I found it, and I felt like I came home, and it was really awesome. And then I spent the next, I don't know, 8 to 12 years doing things that surrounded the thing that I ended up finally falling in love with. I did photography. I made films. I started several businesses that ultimately failed because I don't like sales. And I had the creative aspect of it, and I wrote, and I went on these journeys, and I read books, and I did all this stuff, and I enjoyed it, but I never felt like I belonged in any of it until I finally decided, you know what, I'm gonna draw. And I started drawing comics, and it felt the same as when I stepped into the comm department. It felt like this is where you need to be. This feels right. There was like an emptiness in me that began to be filled in a way that was like very satisfying and exceptionally frustrating, because
Yeah.
that gap between what I want to produce and what I'm able to produce was a giant chasm at the time. And I've been closing that gap and moving the goalposts on myself ever since then. And I've come to find huge satisfaction in that journey of progression, understanding that I'm never going to reach the touchdown. I'm never going to finish that race, but I will continue to progress and get better. And so I throw that out there because I think it's important that, Josh and I are talking here, and we're going to talk about cartooning and illustration and composition and ink and all of this stuff that we have found a home in and that we love. But that's not to say that that stuff is any better or any worse than anything else, because I know that there are people that found like wood turning once they got a lathe and they found their calling, right? Or they do whatever and they come into it and they're like, finally, I feel like this is what I should be doing with my life. I feel like I finally belong in a situation rather than trying to fit into a situation.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are just a couple stories that like came to mind, and I think it's important to kind of be aware of your self-talk and aware of like kind of that inner voice that you finally like when you finally achieve, which is really hard. And I hate the word passion because I don't feel like it fits. But when you find like your calling or that series of activities or that hobby where, or that job or that lifestyle where you feel like this is where I'm meant to be and this is what I'm meant to be doing, there's something so fulfilling about that it like transcends materialism and capitalism to the point where you're willing to make sacrifices for that thing. Instead of chasing the emptiness of amassing things, you begin to become something rather than having things.
Yeah, and I think like to kind of highlight too a little bit of what you were saying at the end there. Um, I think that's the thing you're going to notice about artists is like artists are rarely satisfied with commercial art. And I was a young artist who like forever was thinking you should get paid for everything you're doing. Like if you have something, make it a product. And it was a really valuable thing because when I got out of school, I was just hustling and getting paid to do art a lot and grew my illustration career a lot quicker than a lot of artists because I think a lot of artists might have maybe been a little more where I am now. Um, but I had this like desire to kind of get paid for everything. And if you weren't getting paid to draw, then why were you drawing? And and what ended up happening was I ended up arriving at this thing that I used to be really critical of, which was the art for art's sake kind of thing. And what I've noticed is like I rarely meet a seasoned artist who's like, you know, spent some times in the trenches doing commercial art who doesn't feel the same way. And it goes across the board to like guys who have what most people would consider like really dream jobs, you know, working on like big films, sometimes even directing those films. And yet, like, most of them are always like wanting to put out something that's an expression that's beyond money, and it's this weird thing. And I think that's because the thing that I've noticed that I would feel kind of ties in my tribe, and I'd include like, you know, the type of people that I tend to get along with are not always artists, but they're usually some kind of artist. Like they're not always like a visual artist, but sometimes maybe they're writers. They're people who want to make things just to make them and make them good, and then hopefully find an audience for those things, and maybe money will follow. But to me, I guess what I'm getting at is like, you know, like the comics tribe is a neat tribe because there's not a ton of money in comics, and so what's unique about comics is most people doing comics would like to do them for a living, but most people doing comics are really doing most of it out of passion, even professionally, because it's just a financial hit to do them, you know, professionally. So it's one of those things where there's something great about that group of people who are just kind of making art and making it just to make it, to try to make it good and try to get people to like it and try to get their voice or their story out there. And so like I feel like anybody who's like kind of chasing money or chasing groups, or like, you know, I'll even say like people who are maybe doing too many challenges, like maybe, you know, and I've seen this like on Instagram, like, you know, the artists who are just like, I'm gonna do Inktober to get more hits, I'm gonna do this challenge to get more hits. Don't get me wrong, we do challenges, we even like the 48-hour art check is a little bit of a challenge too. But my point is like, you know, make sure you're chasing the thing that you want to chase. Like I wouldn't personally, I would love to see more people do the 48-hour art check, but I'd be so bummed to find out if somebody did it just for the sheer reason of like, that's a cool hashtag, maybe that'll get me followers, you know? Because like the whole purpose of this is to like facilitate making more art and kind of keeping yourselves accountable to it. So like, to me, what I'm like, I was really excited to see like Scott's channel, which I'm going to watch the rest of that video after this, and other people who've taken on the challenge because they're sincerely like trying to make something. Yeah. And they're trying to use this as a vehicle to try to help facilitate that happening. That to me is like great. And like I said, I think it's a good thing to occasionally question your motivations, you know, just to see, am I just kind of trying to be accepted by, you know, the whole world, or am I like trying to kind of find my crew, like my readers, my people, you know? Yeah. 'Cause like that's a totally different pursuit. And what I will say is the trying to find your people pursuit is a much more doable pursuit, you know?
Yeah, and I think along those lines, I think it's important to note that I don't believe either of us are advocating for kind of an extremism. Because I do have a problem with somebody who makes art for art's sake, and that's the only thing they do, and they use that as a bludgeon to other people who take money for their art, or people who are balancing out between a commercial gig and what they're doing on the side. And somehow you get the idea that, oh, it's more pure to starve and live in the woods and paint the things that you want to paint and don't show it to anybody because it's all for the sake of art. I think that's just as bad as the person who is on the opposite extreme, that is like, art has no value unless it sells, and I'm only going to chase the cash, and I'm only going to do, what moves and nothing else, and who cares about, vulnerability or authenticity. I think both of those extremes are super problematic. And in the middle, and I say in the middle, meaning just inside of either one of those, there is a huge spectrum. And I think your level of authenticity and your level of involvement is going to fall somewhere on that spectrum, and it's going to be a different ratio for you than it is for everybody else. And it could be that your ratio is that you want to do like one watercolor on a Saturday in the woods and then go be a lawyer the rest of the week. And if that is what feels right to you, then that's great. It could be that I knew a guy who, because of the way he had kind of timed things in the marketplace, was able to sell his house and downgrade and buy outright a nice, smaller house, and only worked 2 days a week as a graphic designer, and then spent 5 days a week doing whatever he wanted. He was a really interesting guy, and he worked for me, and he was such a good designer. I kept trying to push him to do more, and he basically just finally said, listen, dude, I will give you 100% for 2 days a week, but that's it. I don't want to, nor do I need to do any more than that. And so there's kind of these two different extremes.
Yeah.
And anything within that range, if you feel like that is a balance that you can strike, and you're not using your position on that spectrum to negate other people's position on that spectrum, it's really good. And you see this in cinema a lot, where you have actors or directors who they'll do a movie that is clearly a movie for the masses. It is clearly intended to be a giant blockbuster with no story that a ton of people are going to see and then forget about later. And then right after that, they'll do some weird indie film that's like super niche, and then they do a big blockbuster again. And it's called the one for you, one for me kind of mentality, where they strike this balance. And I know I've been talking about Sean Gordon Murphy a lot lately, but Sean Gordon Murphy does this, right? He does a book for himself that is very personal and very weird. And then he does Batman. And then he does another book from Scotty Young does the same thing. He spent almost a decade doing The Wizard of Oz. Very clearly commercial adaptation of a very popular children's book. It was super popular. Every issue that he sold, the floppies didn't do too well, but the trade paperbacks killed every single time for a decade. And there's so many of those books that he could have kept going for a long time. And then he was like, that's a good stopping point. And then he did I Hate Fairyland, and he's done all this weird stuff since then. And he just calls up Marvel and he says, hey, I want to write Rocket Raccoon. And I want to hire like Jake Parker to draw like this weird dream sequence with Groot. And he just kind of like, and so you see these people kind of oscillating back and forth, this interesting balance of, I'm going to take some freelance work, and then I'm going to do this ash can, and then I'm going to take this day job, and then in the evenings I'm going to do this autobio comic. I'm going to teach, and then I'm going to draw children's books, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to animate a short. And
so I also do want to interject here too. It's like, if you look at just the two of us, like neither of us are like going into poverty because of our art. In fact, we're using our art and our expertise of art to make a living. And, like Cory with teaching, with me with like in the most commercial way possible, in the souvenir industry. So it's like, and I'm glad, because I have a specialty that allows me to earn a little bit more than your average Joe, because I've acquired a certain set of skills. And I think that there's a few things to kind of point out. Like, one is that there's this myth of like Vincent van Gogh, that he died in obscurity and was just kind of making his art. Well, he did die in obscurity, and it's a very tragic story. But you got to understand, Vincent van Gogh was hustling like crazy. He
Mm-hmm.
was trying to get into every gallery. Part of why he was depressed was like not a lot of people would have him, but he kept pressing on. He was like trying to build an artist community off the coast of Japan and networking with other artists. I'm not saying we should all aspire to be Van Gogh, but my point is like even Van Gogh didn't want to be a tree that just fell in the forest and made no sound.
Right.
And I think that that's the point is like, um, to me, I think there's sometimes too much value in the like online, where it's like if an image isn't liked a million times, it's not a great image.
Yeah.
But the adverse is quite often true, where some of the best artists I know will get like 3 likes for an image they post, and it'll be better than 80% of my feed of people I'm following.
Yeah.
It's just, um, but I agree. It's like you want to find a balance. And honestly, like, I've had this talk with like people I graduated with, like most of my graduating class ended up working in art, but there was this period of time where a couple people just kind of dropped off and they had better skills than I did.
Mm-hmm.
And if I bumped into them today and they weren't making a living doing art or like getting paid to do their art, I would have a really long, annoying conversation with them about how they should be making a living doing art, because like your monetary value is better, your life is better, and you at least get to use your creativity at work, which is great. So to me, like I would think it's akin to like, a tattooing gig. Like I know the tattoo industry can be pretty tough. It's an outsider lifestyle, but at the same time, it is a living. It's a specialty, and you get to draw all day. You're not having to lay bricks. You're not like bruising yourself every day you go to work. You're not like slaving away in the hot sun, and that's a pretty good like thing to do for a career. So my point is like, I agree with Cory. I think it's smart to do both. Like, and if you can find a way to do the thing that's just purely authentic and get paid for it, I think that's the sweet spot that most of, what I would call my tribe is like kind of going after, where it's like, somewhere there's got to be this like kind of sweet spot where you get to do the thing that you would do anyway for money. I think that's kind of the goal there.
Yeah.
Anyhow, I hope we didn't get too sidetracked or anything.
No. Scott says White Knight, which is the book that Sean Gordon Murphy did for Batman, was awesome, and I agree, it was really good. And the new Scotty Young book that he wrote is pretty great, Middle West. And then Victor Rodriguez said those are valid points about the two extremes, about doing art for the sake of art and doing art for just a paycheck. There needs to be a balance between the two. At least that's what I think. I think that as well. And then Scott said, yeah, Victor, I think the balance becomes the key word for artists and for everybody else too. And I think there's a term that I've heard in martial arts, not that I take martial arts. I'll tell you where this comes from so that I'm being honest. I was paid to film a business conference. So this is where I'm stealing this from. I went to this business conference 2 weeks a month for 14 months straight for this one job, and I flew there every time and lived in a hotel for half a year. Anyway, and I sat there and I listened to this guy, and he did judo, he played rugby professionally or whatever. But he said that part of judo is centering, where you find your center, where you find your balance, because judo is about taking your opponent's energy and kind of throwing them off balance while you maintain your balance. And the interesting thing about it was, he said, it's not that you strike a balance and stay there. It's that you strike a balance and you center yourself and you recognize when you're off and you recenter. And he says finding a balance is not a state of mind as much as it is constantly recentering so
Yeah.
that you can continue to adjust. And I think that's the key with that balance, right? Is it's going to be different for everybody, but it's also going to be different for each individual at different points and times in their life. There's going to be
Yeah.
times where you need to adjust a little bit towards the one side or a little bit towards the other side. Or like when I got my master's, I was in the middle of doing my webcomic and I had to completely abandon that comic. My master's was in illustration, kind of the intersection of illustration and graphic design. And so I was still doing creative things, but I had to shift. I had to shift away from doing what I wanted to do to doing what I had to do, and so that I could have more time to do what I wanted to do later. But I still felt balanced and centered doing that. And so I think it's one of those that recentering often is important. And it's not to say that like if you do 60% of this and 40% of this, then you'll be balanced and it'll be okay. That might be it for Tuesday, but what happens on a Thursday? Or what happens next year? Or what happens when you have a baby? Or what happens when you get married? Or what happens when you hurt your hand? Or what happens when, like, to pay the bills, you have to make a series of choices that seriously limits your free time. There's always going to be a position that you take that is going to balance and recenter. It's not that there's just a road and you stay on that road and you're good to go. It's that you have to come to that road and notice when you're off of it every single time and come back to it. And the road will shift and change and turn. And as long as you're spend as much time on it or crossing it as you possibly can, then you're going to be better off than not.
Yeah, so it's like that Zen Buddhist idea of being like water, which is really, really hard for, I think, the types of personalities that are drawn to cartooning. Like for me, I'm really a big person on control and kind of like I really like controlling my story. I really like controlling art. And so going into an art directorial position, that was a really hard thing because a lot of it's completely out of your control and has more to do with how flexible you are and how quick you can be with like kind of course correcting and problem solving. And so it's like, and problem solving on the fly. And there's a lot of that in the process of cartooning, but you're in much more control. And so I think that that's a really good thing to kind of mention, the kind of balance thing, because that definitely tends to be a struggle with like most artists I know, most cartoonists I know, especially younger artists, because life throws you curveballs and you kind of have to adapt. And then if you want to keep doing this thing and live kind of sustainably as an artist, in whatever way, even if you're like waiting tables, but you still want sustainable input of art, it becomes more and more challenging the further you get. And so like if you're not flexible and you're not kind of learning that balance, then you can quickly find yourself like falling over on the mat, kind of trying to figure out what happened. And I think that's a pretty good point for us to kind of end up on. Victor was saying change is constant and you have to be able to adjust accordingly if you want to maintain that balance. Yes. And enter the dragon. It is like a finger pointed away by the moon. Do not concentrate on the finger or you'll miss all the heavenly glory. Oh. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, that's correct.
So yeah, you can find my work at quarterlystories.com. You can find Cory's work at corykerr.com. You can follow us on Twitter. It's 48 Hour Art Check on Twitter.
48 Hour Art Check, all spelled out with no spaces.
Boom. So follow that on Twitter. And then if you can, if you're listening to this on iTunes, leave us a 5-star rating and a nice review. We noticed a little uptick in the listeners and we appreciate it. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And I feel like I'm forgetting something. Is there something else?
I don't know. I think we both need to. We've been talking about doing sleep as a topic, probably because of the need for sleep. So I don't know. Yeah, let's subscribe to Josh on YouTube and ring that bell, and me on YouTube and ring that bell. And if you want an extra notification, you can hit us up on Twitter. Also, if you have questions or topics or comments and you want to continue this conversation, you can do that in the chats, or you can have kind of an ongoing conversation on Twitter. Josh and I will both have access to that account. And so, if you want to jump on, we're just trying to expand the conversation, because especially the last several shows, I feel like the audience participation has really like leveled the show up and made it really awesome. Because if I'm just talking to myself, or if Josh and I are just talking to each other, it's not as good as like, I think 6 heads are better than 2, and 2 are better than 1, and I don't know.
Agreed.
Yeah, you cut off 1 head and it grows back 2, or I'm not sure. But anyway, jump on Twitter, jump on here. And if you have any future topic ideas, we'd love to hear them. You guys are awesome. If you haven't done a 48-hour art check yet, try it out. Grab a buddy and do it, and go live and tell us about it so that we can help you promote it. And we'll see you guys in a couple days.
Yes.